Welcome, and thank you all for joining our webinar today on the pledge to combat pension scams. It's great to see so many of you in attendance for such an important topic. I'm sure that many of you will have already heard about the pledge we launched last November to help combat pension scams. Pension scams are devastating. They destroy lives. They quite literally rob people of the security and future they've spent a lifetime saving for. Our aim today is simple. It's to persuade you to sign up to the pledge and do all you can to help protect savers. Pension pots, large and small, are being targeted. Research from Action Fraud shows victims are losing anything from under £1,000 to over £500,000. More than £30 million has been reported as stolen by scammers since 2017. And we know the real figure will be significantly higher than that, since so many scams go unreported. That's a huge amount of money, which has been diligently saved by people only to have it stolen away just when they need it. We'll be hearing later from some real victims just how devastating it's been for them. When we launched the pledge in November last year, we spoke first with our key stakeholders, the large pension providers and industry bodies, and asked them to sign up. Over 200 schemes and organisations have pledged so far, and we have had some fantastic support from those key stakeholders. Those who haven't joined yet are gearing up to join, educating themselves and amending their systems so they are confident they're following the recommended procedures. And now we're turning to you, the trustees, the ones in the front line of this battle against scammers. You are the first line of defence, and savers, whether they know it or not, rely on you to help protect their savings. That's why we're appealing to you directly to ask you today to sign the pledge. Over the next hour, you'll learn all about the pledge, why we want you to commit to the pledge, what it means for savers, and what it will involve from you. You'll also have the opportunity to submit your questions and comments to us as we go along. These will be answered in the Q&A session towards the end. So here's a quick run through of what we'll be covering today. I'm delighted that Charlotte Jackson from the Money and Pension Service is joining us and will be sharing some of the calls that TPAS received from scams victims. Then we'll be joined by Margaret Snowdon, OBE, Chair of the Pension Scams Industry Group, who will touch on the pension scams landscape and talk about the role of industry. We'll then hear from our Director of Communications, Liz Hickey, who will take us through the pledge and explain how you can get involved. You'll then hear from Detective Sergeant Chris Buckingham from the City of London Police, who will talk us through when you should report a pension scam and what a good report looks like. The final session will be your opportunity to ask questions and submit comments to our expert panel. I'd also like to draw your attention to our feedback questionnaire, which is now available at the top of the menu to the left-hand side of the video player. Please fill this out before you leave, even if you can't stay with us to the end. I do hope that you find this webinar engaging and informative. You can start submitting your questions now for the Q&A session. Please type your questions into the box below the video player. You'll need to minimize the player if you're watching in full screen. And the slides from today's webinar will be available for download in the resource tab of the delegate area once the webinar has finished. I'd now like to welcome Charlotte Jackson, Head of Pensions Operation and Customer Protection Strategy at the Money and Pension Service.
Thank you, Nicola, for the introduction. We are delighted to be here today to do this session on really the voice of the customer and to really give an insight into how pension scams are really affecting the lives of the people that contact our service. I'm here because one of the key roles that we play is to provide a free and independent service to people who have any type of pension problem or question. And we offer a range of different helpline services, web chats, our traditional Basildon Bond writers who send in their little pieces of stories to us by post, and through the thousands of people that contact us online. Pension scams is a very small part of what we do. It represents around 1% of the work that we do in our pension operations service. And that equates to, at the moment, about 50 calls every month where the stories that people tell us give us some insight into potential pension scams, mis-selling and fraud. We've got 3 calls that we're going to share with you today that illustrate slightly different stories and slightly different experiences. The first call that I'm going to share with you is the story of a man who, as you'll hear from the call, is quite shaken up about believing that he has lost around 15,000 of his £18,000 of savings. He transferred his money from a SIP, and this call will give you a little bit of an insight into his story.
Good morning, the Pensions Advisory Service. My name's David. How may I help?
I have a SIP account that appears to have gone completely pear-shaped.
Really? Okay.
They arranged it on my behalf.
Okay.
I took it out in 2009. I had a policy with Zurich with 18,000 in, and they advised me to put it into a SIP.
Right.
It started off okay. It got to 2018, and the money dropped to 3,400. The lad that set it up for me, I got in touch with him, and I said, what's happening? There seems to be £15,000 has completely disappeared. So I said, oh, don't worry about it. What it is, because the account's been stagnant for so long, the last thing I heard from him was somebody else will be taking it over and they'll be in touch with you.
Right, I understand, yeah. I don't know if it's a scam, but I think it's a sort of pension where they've been investing it in, shall we say, questionable assets.
In land in Mexico and some property in Crete.
I've got to tell you, what happens is you probably find that these assets are worthless. There's no assets there. These type of investments are not permissible any longer. But it leaves you in a situation where your pension effectively is nearly valueless.
Yeah.
Now, there is a couple of things you can do. The first thing is that you can contact the Financial Conduct Authority. Do you have information relating to when you first transferred this pension from Zurich?
Yeah, I've got all the paperwork from beginning to end.
Right, that's good. Now, what you can do is contact the Financial Conduct Authority and find out have they got any information on this company. Have they had any? What complaints have they had?
Right.
Now, the second thing that you need to do is there is a scheme available which is run by the government. It's called the Financial Services Compensation Scheme.
This next call that we're going to share with you is the story of a man who transferred his pension savings into a SAS. And the call was actually received from an IFA who was advising the partner of his client who had transferred into unregulated investments.
My name is Sue. How can I help you today?
Hello, Sue. It's Neil here. I was just ringing on behalf of somebody, actually. They had I think they might be the victims of a scam.
Okay.
I was just wondering, he's not that financially savvy.
Right.
He had a Hewlett-Packard pension, and he left Hewlett-Packard and set up as a sort of physio, and he's self-employed physio. Anyway, he was struggling for a bit of money. One of the clients was a financial advisor. Now, this guy was a mortgage advisor. And
right.
He effectively said, well, look, we can get your money out of your pension. You speak to my brother, who's a guy in Canvey Island. Anyway, him and his brother sort of combined together to help this guy set up a limited company so that they could set up a SAS so that he could then withdraw money from the SAS. There was no advice ever given. It was all done as if he'd done it himself. So they all they tried to keep it at arm's length. But it was obviously done as an unregulated investment. And about 5 years later, he gets a letter from HMRC saying that he's had an unauthorised payment. And he owes HMRC £32,000. And by the way, there's nothing in your SAS now. There's 100,000 that was in there that disappeared. So He's sort of obviously completely devastated by it all.
Of course.
It's basically been done as if this bloke was just like a mate helping him out, and then but he's run away with all his money. It's just a bit of a mess.
Sure, of course it is.
I mean, I think at some point it's got to be handed back over to this chap.
Yeah.
I just wanted to help him, sort of put him on the right track.
Sure. We do have appointments specifically for people who have been affected by scams, with regard to helping them, look at how they can rebuild their pensions. So that may be something of interest to him. There is also, we have on our website, so pensionsadvisoryservice.org.uk, we have PDF documents, and one of those is pension scams. You might want to have a look at that as well. But what I'll do, I'll see if I can find out any more information and give you a call back.
This next call, you'll hear the story of a lady who's not dissimilar from many of the customers that call us. Attempting to simplify her pension arrangements, she's transferred her money on the advice of somebody who contacted her out of the blue into a company and has invested in shares in that company. The company has now gone bankrupt, and she has been contacted most recently by a branch of another company that she has had a contact with to investigate recovering her lost pension savings at a cost of 20% of her funds.
Hello, good morning. You're through to the Pensions Advisory Service. My name is Rob. How can I help you?
I wonder if you can. Basically, I had a pension and they've gone obviously into liquidation, but I have had a company ringing me who, it's one of these people who they say they can get my pension back, but they take like 20% off me. So I don't really know a lot about pensions, so I just don't know what to do.
The chances are those third parties that are calling you are scammers.
Right.
I mean, have you received any paperwork from the trustees of the pension scheme?
I won't lie, I'd forgot about it, and there's just loads of forms online, and I'm absolutely confused. I'm just really asking for help. What should I do? And he's like, you've definitely told wealth management, we can definitely get your money back, and blah 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 blah. And but obviously I'm reluctant, because obviously if they do get my money back, they're going to take a large percentage of it.
Of course they are.
I'm 51 and I've lost a bit of money here, and I'm devastated, to be honest, right? It's awful, but I kept thinking to myself, I'll do it. And then this guy keeps ringing me, and he's obviously pushing.
Yeah, of course.
Now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, Christ, will I get this money back? This is like thousands of pounds here, and this is for my future, for me and my husband. I feel like I've been conned, I really do, for this guy to get his commission.
You're absolutely spot on. But again, there are, there's a particular process that needs to be followed. We can outline the process, what next steps you might need to take, without necessarily involving these third-party ambulance chasers.
Hopefully you can help me and point me in the direction, and then I can ring up and ask for help whenever I need it.
We don't charge a fee for our services at all. We're an information and guidance helpline, of course. But no, we just tell you, what steps you might need to take. Again,
because this guy on the phone saying it'll be cash in your hand, and I'm thinking, well, anything to do with pensions goes straight back into a pension pot.
They're salesmen.
So,
they're looking to meet
absolutely.
a monthly sales target.
Well, thank you so much for your help. I really appreciate it.
I hope that those 3 calls have been a useful illustration of the types of things that we're seeing. They're not particularly unusual, sadly, for us to have coming through to our helpline, and they share some common factors. Typically, the person is trying to do the right thing. They're often trying to simplify something that is, for them, very complicated. They may be slightly overambitious or nervous about doing the wrong thing. All of them find themselves in an increasingly complex and difficult situation to unravel. They're really difficult calls to have, thankfully, amongst the smaller amounts of those that we get coming in every day, but not ones we want to see more of. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Charlotte. We're now going to hear from Margaret Snowdon, OBE, Chair of the Pension Scams Industry Group.
Thank you for inviting me to look at the role of the industry in combating scams. Today we've heard about the devastating impact of pension scams, not just financially, but emotionally as well. And it's all too easy to paint the picture of a scammer as a criminal, robbing people of their futures. But the truth is that not all scams are technically illegal, but all are morally repugnant. I'll discuss some of the ways that these professional liars exploit their victims and what you can do to stop them. Scammers are sophisticated. They know the law and how to get around it. They use a variety of tactics to mislead members. And they often build trusting one-to-one relationships with members. So when it comes to making decisions about their pensions, savers often mistakenly believe that they know what they're doing. They don't believe what they're being told might not be in their best interests. Anecdotal feedback is that savers end up having a better relationship with their scammer than their trusted advisors or the scheme, because scammers go out of their way to engage with victims to make them feel valued. It's worth scammers' while to invest this way because the return is so good. Whereas the pensions industry would typically have a more distant relationship with their members, we need this to change. We need to encourage everyone in the pensions industry to establish stronger relationships with their members. Following the financial crash of 2008, we saw a number of pension liberation scams operating in the market. And although action was taken by regulatory bodies and HMRC to prevent these scams, we still see some occurrences of attempts at pension liberation, so it's not gone away. As we move forward through the current pandemic, there are other risks to consider as well. Although the number of pension scams doesn't seem to have risen since the beginning of the COVID crisis, the industry needs to remain aware of the potential for an increase in these types of scams as furlough and other COVID support relaxes. Many scammers will now prey on those who are able to access their pension rather than have to invent convoluted ways to apparently circumvent tax rules. Pension freedoms have removed barriers for savers over 55 to access their cash. And if the economy continues to slump, scammers will be able to more easily target savers who are vulnerable through financial difficulty. And this can either be to con those who have received cash sums from their pensions or to encourage others to access their pension funds to invest in spurious investment schemes. Scammers and scams continue to get more complex. And scammers can pose as genuine companies and target people through online advertising, through social media, and might still use traditional methods like adverts in local papers. They work in whatever way suits them best. The FCA has reported a 29% increase in clone firm investment scams in April 2020 compared to March 2020. Action Fraud also reports that savers lost over £78 million between January and December 2020 to clone firm investment scams, and that's no small amount of money. The FCA describes clone firms as fake firms set up by scammers using the name, the address, and the firm reference number of real companies authorised by the FCA. And once set up, these fraudsters will then send sales materials linking to websites of legitimate firms to dupe potential investors into thinking they're dealing with the real firm when they're not. Industry is seeing an increase in international scams happening at multiple levels. International scams can have advisors, introducers, providers, or the investment itself based overseas. And all of this tends to be higher risk and not regulated by the FCA or protected by UK legislation. Many international scams don't take the whole pot, but instead deplete it with high charges and fees or high commissions to introducers and savers, and often promising high returns which don't materialise. We're also seeing a rise in some scammers presenting themselves as legitimate claims management companies targeting victims of scams. and even targeting companies' pension schemes to get access to data. Those perpetrating these scams will often obtain contact details of victims from those who ran the original scam. The claims management companies will then use the same confidence tactics, charging an upfront fee with a promise of getting scam victims' money back, which is quite unlikely. Industry needs to be aware of the tactics used by scammers and remain alert to instances such as high fees and charges, unregulated introducers, advisors or investments, risks with overseas transfers and transfers from DB to DC schemes. It's quite a lot to ask, and there's a lot of subjectivity, but we do need to be on our guard. One of the things that makes pension scams even more devastating is that victims don't often realise that they've lost money for months or even years, and this leaves them with less chance of recovering their money and less opportunity to rebuild their savings. So we're asking you, the pensions industry, to go further to identify scams and warn members. We're calling on you to pledge to combat scams. The PSIG Code of Good Practice provides a guide for trustees, providers and administrators to consider when making a transfer out. The code sets out 3 main principles for protecting scheme members. Communicate the risk of pension scams to members, get to know the current scam strategies and stay alert to evolving scam tactics to inform due diligence, and put in place robust and appropriate due diligence measures to assess the level of risk of a transfer and respond to it. And these very principles are the foundations of the pledge to combat pension scams. The pensions regulator is setting expectations for good practice, asking that trustees, providers and administrators follow these principles by raising awareness of the risks, educating themselves about the current and emerging tactics, and taking appropriate due diligence measures. We know that some of you out there will already be doing many of the steps set out in the pledge and in the PSIG Code of Good Practice, and I thank you for making a difference to members. But for others, it might mean a more thorough examination of your transfer processes to identify where you can make changes. We want to make protecting savers from pension scams a routine task. The pledge also aims to provide increased confidence for the industry and clarify responsibility. Feedback from the industry shows that people can be reluctant to call members because they worry it could constitute giving advice without proper authorisation, and this is simply not true. It remains the case that calling members where concern exists will provide potential victims with more accurate information about the risks of a given transfer and an understanding that you may not be able to get from another communication. TPR's toolkit module and PSIG's code both provide you with more information on when to call members and what to ask. And just to be clear, we're not asking you to call every member. Most transfers are fine, so it should be settled with minimal scrutiny and calls won't be needed. Where we ask you to have that conversation is on the higher risk cases whenever you possibly can. And it's clear that to combat scams, we're all going to have to work together. No one organisation, no one company can do it by themselves. And I think our strength is in working together as an industry. And that's why in the pledge, we're also encouraging all of us in the industry to engage with each other, to work together and build better lines of communication. We'd like to see schemes and administrators agreeing practices and processes together. We need to improve scam reporting. The pledge to combat pension scams seeks to raise the bar for these standards and encourage better relationship building with members at an industry level. We're not looking to increase the costs hugely, but to find smart ways to protect people. And we can all help by doing our bit. As the landscape of pension scams evolves, we'll continue to update the PSIG Code of Good Practice to help support the industry to face the reality of pension scams. In the meantime, the third version of the code is due to be published tomorrow to complement the pledge. And it's been updated to reflect changes since 2019, and it looks quite different from previous versions. It's been broken down into different sections, including practitioner notes, technical notes, and a resources pack, and is much easier to navigate and to find what you're looking for. It's been reviewed by a large number of people in the industry, and hopefully you'll find it better serves your needs than perhaps the previous version. But we expect another code update before the end of this year to reflect new regulations coming into force following the Pension Schemes Act. We know it's not possible to stop every scam, but by working together, we can create an environment in which it's much harder for scammers to prey on savers' pensions. Every single one we stop is a person saved. Thank you for listening, and I'll now hand back to Nicola.
Thanks, Margaret. We're now going to hear from our Director of Communications, Liz Hickey.
Thanks, Nicola. As we've heard from Margaret, we have worked with PSIG to distill the 3 core principles of the Code of Good Practice into tangible action you can take that will help protect your members. We know that the awareness of scams in the industry is high, and some are already making excellent strides towards doing what they can. But there is more that can be done. For some of you, the pledge might be the vital first step in taking proper action to protect scheme members. The pledge also aims to inspire confidence. We want savers to feel confident that their money is protected. We want those in the industry to feel confident that they are taking every reasonable step to stop a pension scam from happening. We want to set expectations about what good practice looks like, focusing on those principles of good practice, raising awareness of the risks, educating oneself about current and emerging tactics, and taking appropriate due diligence measures for transfers. These principles are the foundation of the pledge to combat pension scams that have been translated into steps that anyone can follow. So what does the pledge to combat pension scams involve? The pledge sets out 6 key actions that fall under the main principles of the Code of Good Practice. The pledge asks you to 1. Regularly warn members about pension scams. Generally, savers don't think about their pension very often, and we would encourage you to communicate about the risks of scams at the times most relevant to members. For example, when they're reading their annual benefit statement, or when they're making a big decision, such as transferring out. That's the time when they're most likely to be receptive to hearing more information about risks. 2. Encourage members asking for cash drawdown to seek impartial guidance from one of the services offered by the Money and Pension Service. For example, the Pensions Advisory Service or PensionWise. Cash drawdowns may not be in a member's best interests, especially in times of economic uncertainty. Scammers may have approached them with enticing investment opportunities, or they may have been recommended by rogue financial advisors. 3. Get to know the warning signs of a scam and best practice for dealing with transfers. To support this, TPR has created a new module on pension scams in our trustee toolkit. Those signing up to the pledge should take this module and encourage all trustees and relevant staff to do so. To support your study, you'll find more resources on the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, ScamSmart website, the TPR website, and also in the PSIG code. You might also like to consider becoming a member of the Pension Scams Industry Forum, and for more information on this, you can contact PSIG directly. 4. Take appropriate due diligence measures by carrying out checks on pension transfers and documenting pension transfer procedures. What can be considered appropriate due diligence may vary from case to case. When you've gathered the information, you need to make an assessment and consider where the risks lie. Is the scheme familiar? Have you checked the FCA warning list and financial services register? Complete an initial risk analysis, and if you find any concern, refer to the pledge website or the PSIG Code of Practice for further detail on what to do next. 5. Clearly warn members if they insist on a high-risk transfer being paid. If you believe there is a risk that the transfer is a scam and you've taken all appropriate due diligence measures, you should contact the member in writing and by phone to share your concerns. These final warnings could help the member to make a different decision. 6. Report concerns about a scam to the authorities and communicate this to the scheme member. We know that pension scams often go unreported because victims might not know that they're victims for years, or they could feel a great deal of shame about having been scammed. Regulators and law enforcement agencies cannot act if we don't know what's going on. That's why we're encouraging the industry to report their concerns related to transfers that they think might be suspicious to the authorities. And you'll hear more on this later from Detective Sergeant Chris Buckingham of the City of London Police. So what are the steps involved in taking the pledge? The pledge is a two-step process. Through pledging, we are asking you show your intent to put these actions into practice. The pledge is not intended as a static and empty show of words. We want it to drive real change and drive up standards. We want you to make the pledge and take positive action to change relevant processes. When you're confident you can meet the actions of these 6 steps, then we ask that you self-certify to us that you meet the requirements of the pledge. You can do this through our pledge web pages. The pledge is voluntary. Although it's not a regulatory requirement, it is a stepping stone to raising standards across the industry. Since launching the pledge, we've worked with the pensions industry to gather feedback about how it works in principle and in practice. We appreciate the size and complexity of what we could be asking you to do. We anticipate that stakeholders will adopt and adapt the principles to best work with their current practices and suit the needs of their clients and members. We appreciate that for third-party administrators and professional trustees, self-certification requires more communication and coordination with other parties. That may involve changes to services already provided under contract, for example, or mean a shift in the way services are delivered. We're assessing the self-certification process and looking at how we can provide a smooth process for third-party administrators that keeps protecting the saver at the heart of the pledge. If you have feedback to provide, please do fill in the webinar evaluation that's been made available to all participants. We've already made some modifications to self-certification of the pledge to meet the realities of the process. These include clarifying that signposting members to PensionWise for impartial guidance might be appropriate in some instances, and that where you are unable to call members, gathering information to understand and communicate the risks of a transfer can be done through other means. We will continue to develop and clarify the principles of the pledge to ensure they remain meaningful and effective for both the industry and for savers. We encourage anyone thinking about pledging to do so now. It's time to take the next step, making pension transfers safer for your members and making it clear to scammers that the industry is taking action against them.
Thank you, Liz. And finally, before we go into the Q&A session, we're going to hear from Detective Sergeant Chris Buckingham, a business stakeholder manager in the City of London Police.
Thank you, Nicola. More than 30 million has been reported as stolen from scammers since 2017. But that's just a figure reported as stolen. We know the true figure is likely to be much higher. The reality is we don't know the true impact of pension scams or how much is lost to them because not all scams are reported. We need your help to understand the extent of the issue. We urge all businesses and individuals, and especially all of you, the experts on the front line, to report fraud and cybercrimes. The better informed we are, the more we know, and the more accurate a figure we have for reported scams, the better we can work to prevent scams and ultimately to protect savers. So please don't be afraid to report it when it comes to scams. This includes reporting your suspicions about a transfer, even if the indication the transfer is a scam, even if the member goes ahead with the transfer. When you report your suspicions, you'll be helping in a number of ways. You'll be helping police investigations in the past, the present, and into the future. You provide vital intelligence which we need to assess pension scams landscape. You'll help to inform national alerts, which protect all communities. You'll help to disrupt criminal activity, although we No, not all scams are illegal. You could help to disrupt a cycle of member distress where fraud may otherwise go on for years. And most importantly, you'll help to reduce harm to savers. If you suspect fraudulent activity, which may lead to a potential scam, you should contact Action Fraud. It's important that we hear about your suspicion. You should use the Action Fraud portal, ideally, online or by app, to record all details where possible. You can also report by calling Action Fraud. Victims more so want to use the call centres, as this is a more personal approach. You should encourage members who may have been a victim of a pension scam to report to Action Fraud. Where fraud is suspected and you're reporting as a professional body, you can submit an information report as opposed to a crime report. You can and should report regardless of whether or not a victim goes on to make a crime or information report. Whoever submits the report will receive an automated letter. The letter could say that the matter will not be taken any further, and will effectively describe the matter as closed. Don't be dismayed by this, as it's an automated process which generates a letter, I think, after 30 days. But rest assured that information will go on to be used for vital research and development. You should use your Action Fraud online portal or actually record all details where possible. The more detail you provide in your report, the more use it will be now or in the future to all intelligence and law enforcement agencies. The intelligence gained from any such reports, even if there are any simple suspicions of scams, are important. They may go on to support trends, statistics, and the intelligence pictures within a multitude of law enforcement agencies, regulatory bodies, or competent authorities alike. We advise sending as much data to Action Fraud as possible because it's a safe and secure platform. For attachments that can't be sent on the platform, you can use a mailbox, which is nfib-intelligence@cityoflondon.pnn.police.uk. This email address is predominantly for professional reporting and not really for the general public. Where reports are made, they're given an NFRC reference number. That stands for National Fraud Reporting Centre. You can quote those numbers in the email with regard to drawing attention to certain reports. So when you make a report to us, it's important to let us know what has happened, what do you know to be the perceived facts, what do you suspect to be criminal activity. You can include things like names, phone numbers, domain names, IP addresses, social media handles, even if perceived to be fictitious. Where there may be issues of clone or brand misuse, report that too. For activities relating to money laundering, you should submit a suspicious activity report to the National Crime Agency, or that would be done by your money laundering reporting officer. There can be crossover between the two reporting silos, be that suspicious activity reports and fraud reports, simply because fraud reports can also be where money laundering is the source of. So therefore, you could end up reporting to two different portals, be that to the NCA or into Action Fraud, by virtue of what it is. So it's not a case of it has to be one or the other, it can be both. Remember, information helps to capture criminals and protects others. When reports come in, they're analysed by our experts within the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, which is part of the City of London Police. We can then match data from the reports across the country, which helps to identify the criminals behind the scams. Your reports are also sent to local police forces for investigation. A scoring system is used and secretly coded. The coding system isn't known, not even to us, but you can hazard a guess that certain factors that are concerned, it can be things like the amount of money lost and the viability of where a suspect may be to attract certain scores. If the report is viable and identifiable, and that's mainly a UK-based suspect, and the report is sent to a suspect's local police jurisdiction. Unlike other crimes, the victim and the suspect may not be in close proximity. And generally speaking, for other crime reports, normally it's where the victim resides as to where the police will investigate it. Unlike with fraud, it goes on where the suspect may be located in order for the police to apprehend that individual. The internet makes it easier for overseas scammers to rip people off in the UK. So quite possibly you will have a suspect abroad and the victim will be in this country. However, with bank accounts, websites, phone numbers and the like, those mediums can be disrupted by the NFIB. In the case of clone reports, the NFIB disruption team will investigate those referrals that are made in by the NFRC reference numbers from the firm that's purporting to be cloned. And with those reports of cloning, we can take those instances to the internet registrars concerned, make an application for them to remove those harmful websites from the internet. And it's important to remember that not every report results in an investigation instantly, but every report does help to build a clearer picture, making the UK a more hostile place for fraudsters to operate. Before I finish, I'd like to say, if there's one thing I'd like to take away with you today from my talk, it's to report scams. Report scams that you know have taken place. Report scams that you suspect might have taken place, and report activity that you think is suspicious that may turn into a scam in the future. Thank you in advance for your help. I'm now going to hand you back to Nicola.
Thank you, Chris. That was really informative. If you haven't already, there is now an opportunity to submit questions to the panel. To submit a question, just click on the box under the video player, type in your question and press submit. The speakers and I will be joined by two more TPR colleagues, Mike Broomfield, Head of Intelligence, and Nick Gannon, Policy Lead. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to submit your questions and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. It looks like we have quite a few questions queued up, so let's get started. So the first question is in two parts. The first part, you have asked all trustees and relevant staff to take the trustee toolkit module. Can you tell us who you expect to take this? So I'm going to go on this first question to Liz to answer.
Thanks, Nicola. We know that lots of organisations will have relevant staff who might find it appropriate and helpful to take the module. And we would have thought that would include people who speak directly to members about their pension, those who might deal with transfers, for example, and anyone completing due diligence checks as part of transfers. And that should ensure some consistency across teams who deal with transfers. Not everybody has to complete the module immediately, obviously, but if you have a plan in place for everyone who you think has a relevant role within your organisation to complete it, then that could be really valuable.
Thank you, Liz. The second part of that question then is we also have our own scams training. This material is kept up to date and allows us to monitor who has taken the training. Could this be used to satisfy the requirement of relevant staff completing the toolkit module? So, Nick, would you answer that one, please?
Of course, yeah, and absolutely. We firmly encourage any organisation that wants to conduct its own scams training, especially if that's in line with the PSIG code, to do so. What we would say, though, is that the toolkit module provides a sort of a baseline level of knowledge, and because it doesn't take very long to carry out, then it's actually easy to roll out to ensure that all members of staff get that baseline very quickly. And the other positive from our point of view is that in doing so, we get the analytics at our end to understand sort of how widely spread that level of knowledge is across the industry.
Thank you, Nick. Right, we'll move on then to the second question. Should TPR press other regulators, for example, the FCA, and tech companies such as Google to stop a lot of the ways pension members get caught up in scams? I'm going to go to Margaret first on that one.
Thanks, Nicola. The short answer is yes. Online access has become a bit more troublesome in a sense, but all search engines and social media should really be subject to the same controls as newspapers and broadcast media. So that means any adverts for financial services should be treated in the same way as financial promotions in a newspaper, and therefore should be authorised. And that means regulators having to work towards that. But the good news is regulators are already looking at this and looking how they can help plug this loophole in a sense. And PSIG has actually been calling for this for some time, looking for financial harm to be part of the online harms bill. And so far we haven't been successful in achieving that. But I think given the pressures, given the knowledge that lots of leads come from online sources, I just think it's a matter of time before it does become better regulated. Yeah. Thanks, Margaret. I wonder, Mike, what's your view on that?
I'd really echo Margaret's point around the online safety bill. So that's something that TPR, along with some of our partners from Project Bloom, like the National Economic Crime Centre and FCA, are really pushing for. At the moment, fraud's not included in that bill. So we really need to keep the pressure up there. Just looking at online safety, it is something that we do tackle as TPR and with our regulatory partners like FCA. So we do take down websites from time to time, but at the moment, not enough's being done. So we really are getting behind that online safety bill. Thanks,
Great.
Nicola.
Thank you, Mike. Let's move on then to the next question. If online systems like Origo or other providers are used, it can be difficult to know what checks they run. And there's an expectation that transfers will be processed quickly through online platforms. We complete relevant due diligence checks on these transfers, but it would be useful to understand if there are any developments in relation to transfers processed through online platforms. I think I'll go to you on that one, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we'd expect those using online platforms to make sure that there are relevant due diligence checks on transfers taking place, and also to understand what it is that the online system is doing. And we'd naturally hope and assume that online platforms are including processes for best practice as part of their systems, but we are looking to understand a bit more about how those platforms operate and how they might integrate best practices into their transfer processes. But you've got to remember that ultimately it's the trustees' responsibility to ensure that the checks are carried out. So there's questions there to answer. But I think Margaret might possibly have a view on this one as well.
Yes, it's thanks, Nick. It's something we've actually looked at and we comment on it in the code. One thing to say about platforms like Origo, etc., they are actually closed networks. So they're set up because transfers between parties are actually quite frequent. So you would expect that in that sort of transfer relationship, the transfers would be what we would call clean transfers, because by common practice they're happening regularly. But in the old days, there certainly used to be a lot of vetting before parties could sign up to be part of those platforms, but now it's not quite so tight. So we would certainly ask those platforms to think a little bit about how they can help the security. But the good news is the vast majority of transfers are regular, routine processes, therefore less likely to be scams.
Thanks, Margaret. Okay, let's go on then to the next question. This one is going to be for Charlotte. Does MAPS offer a telephone service for people who are poorly sighted or blind or do not have access to the internet?
Thank you. Yes, we do. So all of our services will make accessible. So what we find is that people come with a wide range of accessibility needs, whether that be eyesight, hearing, or are just generally either digitally excluded or find it difficult to navigate through websites. So we spend quite a lot of time looking at how we best serve those needs and what's the best channel and support that we can offer through that. So particularly in this COVID world, we've done a lot of work virtually, as we're doing today now, and are working very closely with a range of accessibility partners on how we can reach people who might otherwise find it quite hard to access us. So we would encourage anybody who has access issues just to tell us what they struggle with, and we'll find the best way of offering that help. But we do spend a lot of time, obviously, talking people through content that other people provide on the internet that they are either struggling using or finding. So no, please just send people our way, and we'll offer that support.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, next one. As a trustee, I'm holding off signing my scheme up to the pledge until I have assurances from our administrator that they will change their practices to adopt this more direct approach. But I'm not convinced I will get those assurances. Should we sign up anyway? Margaret, I'm going to come to you on this one first.
Thanks, Nicola. Yes, it's a question I've heard already, and it is quite difficult when your administrators aren't completely in charge of what happens on schemes. It's obviously down to trustees, but as I heard earlier, there are contracts in place which can sometimes make it very difficult for an administrator to take additional action. So it has to be something that's worked on between trustees and administrators. But we are talking about a pledge, and a pledge is an intention. So I think, almost everyone could sign up to a pledge at this point, and then, get all the processes lined up afterwards. But administrators, I think, will be building their processes to be pledge compliant. I'd be very surprised if they don't. But it's important that trustees work alongside them to make sure that they are able to put those practices into place for your scheme. So I think you'll find that administrators are probably knocking on your door, but make sure that you help them.
Thank you, Margaret. Actually, I think I'm going to move on to the next question now, just so we can get through a few more of these questions in the time we've got. And I'm going to come to you, Liz, on the next one, which is this. Our chairman has signed the pledge on behalf of our scheme. Should individual trustees sign the pledge as well?
So at the moment, we are happy for the pledge to be represented at an organisational level, as long as the principles are followed throughout the organisation. So you don't need to all sign up individually if your chairman has signed up on behalf of the organisation, provided the action is being taken.
Great. Thank you. That's clear, Liz. Next question then. Will the pensions regulator expect trustee boards that have taken the scams pledge to work to higher standards and be more diligent than boards that have not taken the pledge? Nick, what's your view on that one?
I think the thing is that trustees and administrators that have taken the pledge will naturally have those processes and procedures in place that other schemes might not. And so I expect they probably already will be working to that higher standard of care. I think probably it's not so much a question for the regulator in this one. It is potentially the pensions ombudsman. So if they're actually ever called to review a transfer case, it's sort of, are you following the best practice or aren't you at the point that potential issue occurred? And I think those schemes that are doing all they can will find themselves probably in a better position than those that weren't.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. That's good. We will move on then to the next question. The regulator has noted a reduction in fraud reporting to action fraud and urged schemes to step up reporting. Do we know this is schemes choosing not to report rather than scam attempts reducing or scammers targeting other avenues? It's a nice question. I'm going to go to you, Chris, on that one.
Thanks, Nicola. I think it's a mixture of things, if I'm honest. Sometimes, unfortunately, the impact of reporting initially may not be always understood immediately. The notion of making information reports, which the industry may feel they don't get feedback on immediately, may have an impact. And also the landscape of fraud and pension fraud in particular changes so frequently. It's keeping up on typologies and making sure that every matter is reported, because it is important to report continuously and then follow up on the feedback thereafter if you haven't heard from a result of that report.
Oh, I think we might have lost Chris there. I was actually going to come to you on this one as well, Mike. Perhaps you could pick up there.
Thanks, Nicola. So I think one of the things we really want industry to do is continue to report to us and report to Action Fraud where they suspect a scam or where they know there's been a victim of a scam. So that gives us an accurate picture of the scams landscape out there. It's particularly pertinent at the moment because we've had the Work and Pension Select Committee, where obviously there's been a call that we've seen quite a substantial amount of pension scams into the billions. What we want to see is that picture coming through reporting so we can actually track the trends and make sure that we tackle them as well. So please keep reporting.
Yeah, lots of anecdotal evidence out there, but as you say, we need the hard evidence, the reports. Thanks, Mike. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This is a nice one for you, Margaret. Where can we find a copy of the PSIG Code of Practice?
Well, from tomorrow, you can get the new code from the PSIG website. And if you've all got your pencils ready, it's combatingpensionscams.org.uk. But if you're stuck, you can also get it from the PLSA or the ABI website, as well as TISA and AMPS. So there are lots of places to get it. So check it out. I think it looks great.
And you said, Margaret, from tomorrow, that's the new refreshed version.
2.2 to be precise.
Great, thank you. Okay, on to the next question. Signing the pledge is one thing. Certifying that we have adjusted processes, communications, etc., to meet all of the pledge requirements is another. What timescales would TPR consider to be reasonable between signing the pledge and certifying? So I'm going to come to you on that one, Liz. Timescales that TPR would consider to be reasonable.
So we know that for some people, they will already be quite a long way down the road. They'll already be doing lots of the practices, and so they could actually do this very quickly. However, for others, they might have to make significant changes. So that's why we've not been prescriptive on the time frame, because it might not be the same for everyone. What's most important to us is that the whole industry knows what's expected of them in terms of fighting scams and the really important role that you can all play in helping keep savers' money safe. And as it's voluntary, we haven't set hard and fast rules on when action might be taken. But those that pledge will be encouraged through TPR communications to take that further action, take that next step and self-certify, and be reminded of the public commitment that they've made to take that extra step and put the pledge into action. So you'll be hearing from us on a regular basis, but there isn't a set deadline, as it were.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Liz. Margaret, anything from your sort of experience of organisations that have been going through this?
Yes, I mean, I think as Liz said, lots of organisations already have processes that are already pretty compliant. The missing step might be calling members, because we do try to encourage a phone call rather than a letter out to an individual, but most, certainly the larger administrators and a lot of the large pension funds already do this. So getting to a certifying stage will probably be quite quick.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, let's move on then. How frequently do you recommend that the risks of pension scams are communicated to members? Liz, I'm going to come to you again on this one.
Sure. So we all know that people don't engage often with pensions. It's something that is kind of sat over there and they don't really think too much about it. So what we're recommending is that the time to warn people about scams is when they are already thinking about their pension. So that might be when they get their annual benefit statement and they're reading that through. It might be if they're getting in touch about drawdown or transfers, or they're coming to the point of making a decision about their pension, because they're likely then to be more receptive to remembering the information about the risks that you're flagging, as opposed to sort of spending additional money, resource, time to communicate out of the blue when they might not be in that receptive space to really hear about the risks.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. Thanks. I'm going to move on to the next one. And Nick, I think I'll come to you on this one. The approach that you are proposing sounds very sensible indeed. Our pensions administration is fully outsourced and very ably done by an organisation that has taken the pledge. Is there any point in the pension trustees pledging as well? What's your view on that one, Nick?
Yeah, I'd say absolutely. I think the thing is that the more bodies within the pensions industry that show willing and show that they want to help protect savers from pension scams, it's the better, and it helps drive the norm. So while the administrator is doing everything that they should be doing, I think it sends a positive message to them that actually the trustees appreciate that work and understand the value of it. And perhaps it sort of feeds through as well into bits that the trustees control a little bit more. So communications to members or to new joiners or things like that, where there's a little bit more hands-on recognition from the trustees that they're doing a job as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I could just pop in that one, Nicola. I see the pledge as something akin to a neighbourhood watch scheme for pensions. So if you publicly pledge that you're going to, look at transfers, particularly with some scrutiny, that's a bit of a warning to scammers to stay away. And I think members would also appreciate knowing that the trustees are interested in and take care of them. So I think that's another reason for pledging.
Yeah, that's a good analogy there. Okay, let's move on to next question, which is for action fraud. I just want to check. Chris, are you back? Is your sound working okay before I read out this question for you?
I hope so.
Yeah, good, you're there. Okay. So the question is, when a suspicion is reported, why are we not, this is to action fraud, why are we not advised of the outcome, whether it's confirmed or not, as this would help us to build our knowledge of scam schemes?
Yeah, absolutely. In simplicity, all I can really say is at the moment, the system is being looked at. I mean, notably, when information reports come in, there is a response. I think it's about 30 days. There's normally a response to say whether or not the information is being looked at, whether it's been progressed or not. Because we have two types of crime or information reports. I gave this in my presentation. As far as information reports go, you get the NFRC number, that National Fraud Reporting Centre number. Just take it as read that's going somewhere and going to be used by someone. I think sometimes it's quite harmful to have a response to come out to say it's not going any further and it's being shelved for the moment, because sometimes it can take weeks, months, maybe even up to a year or more for leads to be followed, because fraud is a complex thing. So I think having an automated letter, if you get one within that 30 days to say the matter is not going any further at that time, isn't helpful at the moment. But I do acknowledge that those letters do go out as it stands. I hope that helps.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm going to move to the penultimate question now, because I think we are coming to the end of our time on questions. So, penultimate question, does the regulator expect the pledge to be replaced by mandatory requirements? And if so, over what timescale is this likely to come into effect? Nick, would you be able to help us on that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think the pledge represents a really good standard of expectation for schemes and administrators and everyone else to follow in terms of protecting members from scams. I think we're definitely going to see the rules tightened up around transfers, but I don't think at this stage that we'll sort of see anything that comes close to sort of generating the quality of service that the PSIG code actually delivers.
Thanks, Nick. And you also have the honour of having the very last question, which is that can you outrightly refuse a transfer?
Under current legislation, only where the transfer is not going to a registered scheme. So the rules as they were drafted or are in force at the moment were drafted a long time ago while people had a very benign view of the pensions industry. If you've been aware, the Pension Schemes Act 2021 includes a clause there with the ability to tighten up transfer regulations. And we're working with DWP at the moment to get those put through. So I would say kind of watch this space for developments in this area.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Nick. And that brings us to the end of our questions. Thank you, panel, and thank you, audience, for keeping those interesting questions coming. So just before we go into our closing remarks, we'd like some audience participation, please, just by answering a very quick poll question. You'll see that the question will appear to the right of the video screen or below if you're watching on a mobile. If you're watching full screen, then you'll need to exit full screen to see the question. So the question. There it is up on your screen now. My knowledge and understanding of pension scams and how I can protect members has improved as a result of the webinar. And we're asking you to strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. So now I've read it, we've got 30 seconds for you to please answer that question. We've got lots of you on the webinar. It's great to see so many of you here, and we'd love to hear from all of you your views on this question, which I will read again. My knowledge and understanding of pension scams and how I can protect members has improved as a result of the webinar. So strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. So we will be collecting those results in, and they will appear very soon on your screen. Here we go. So a great result with 94% of you either strongly agreeing or agreeing that your knowledge and understanding has improved, which is great to see. And at 20% strongly agreeing, that's really encouraging. So thank you very much for participating in that and for taking part. So thanks everyone for taking part. I'd like to draw our discussion to a close with a reminder of the key messages we've heard today. Scams are devastating. They rob savers of the future and security they have been saving for, and they are happening right now as we speak. Scammers are smart and they thrive in times of economic uncertainty and fear. So given the turbulent current economic situation, it's even more important that we do all we can to prevent scams. That includes all of you here today, because as trustees, you play a crucial role in helping to protect savers. We've heard firsthand today about the appalling effects from these criminal activities. By signing the pledge and adhering to the PSIG Code of Good Practice, you'll be helping to prevent more scams in the future. Over 200 organisations have signed up to the pledge already, and we would like you to sign up too. We hope that you found the webinar useful, and you'll be able to download the slides from the resource tab in the delegate area, and the webinar recording will be available to watch again from tomorrow by navigating back to this page. On the last slide, you'll find links to the important information we've discussed today, which will be made available as a standalone document in the Resources tab, which is on the menu to your left for easy access. Thank you to all of our speakers today and to all of you for joining us. Goodbye.